Somewhere in the mountains of North Korea, hidden from the rest of the world, there are places that most people don't know exist. You won't find them on any tourist map. No journalist has ever walked through their gates. No doctor has ever visited their sick. And for the people trapped inside, there is no phone call, no lawyer, no trial. There is only one rule: work until you can't anymore. This is not a story from 100 years ago. This is happening right now. In North Korea, those words could erase your entire life. People have been sent to political prison camps for things like sitting on a newspaper that had a picture of the country's leader on it, or mentioning that the leader didn't go to school for very long. Small things, ordinary things, and then gone. In North Korea, whole families are locked up for the crimes of just one person. If a parent makes a mistake, the children go to the camp. If a child does something wrong, the parents go too. This is called 3 generations of punishment. One mistake, and your grandmother, your mother, your little sister, all of them vanish behind the same walls. And nobody on the outside ever hears from them again. These places are called Kwanliso political prison camps. The North Korean government operates a network of forced labor camps believed to hold between 80,000 and 120,000 political prisoners. They sit deep in the mountains, far away from cities. They're plainly visible in satellite photos, yet the North Korean government insists they don't exist. Think about that for a moment. You can look at these places from space. You can see the fences, the watchtowers, the rows of buildings. And yet the government looks the world in the eye and says, there is nothing there. That's where things get complicated. Because for a long time, almost nobody who went in ever came back out to tell the story. If you've made it this far, you're already deeper into this story than most people ever go. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because what survivors describe from inside these camps is something most people can't imagine. Now, there is one name that changed everything. One person who, against all odds, found a way out and then spent years trying to tell the world what he saw. His name is Shin Dong-hyuk. He is the only known person born inside a North Korean political prison camp who escaped and lived to tell the world about it. Let that sink in. He didn't get sent there. He was born there. The camp was not something that happened to his life. It was his life. He had never seen a road. He had never eaten a proper meal. He had never heard music. He didn't know what a family was supposed to feel like. He was born in 1982. The child of 2 prisoners who were allowed to marry as a reward for good behavior. Neither of his parents had much say in the matter. From his very first breath, he was already a prisoner. Growing up inside the camp, Shin learned the rules fast. And the rules were simple: work, obey, and report. If you saw someone break a rule, anyone, even your own mother, you were expected to report them. Staying silent was itself a crime. Guards raised prisoners to have no emotions and no real family bonds. Inside the camp, if your parents did something wrong, you were expected to report them just like you would report any stranger. Children worked alongside adults. The workday in some camps ran from 4 in the morning to 8 at night in summer, even longer in other seasons, and included mandatory political lessons before sleep. There was no childhood. There was no play. There was only labor and hunger, day after day, season after season. And the hunger was constant. Food rations were tiny, mostly salted cabbage and corn. Prisoners slowly lost their teeth. Their gums turned black. Many died of malnutrition, disease, or the effects of torture. To survive, many prisoners caught and ate frogs, insects, rats, and snakes. Even eating a rat required getting permission from the guards first. One day, Shin learned that his mother and his older brother were planning something forbidden. They were going to try to escape. In another world, a son might help his family. He might cheer them on. He might say nothing and let them try. He was a child, raised in a system that taught him from the moment he could understand words that the greatest loyalty was to the camp, not to his family. He didn't do it out of hatred. He did it because it was all he had ever been taught. After he reported them, Shin watched as his mother and brother were promptly executed. "I feel very sorry," Shin later said, "and I am shocked that I didn't have the emotions to justly tell you how I did this to my own family." That quote alone tells you something almost impossible to understand from the outside. What these camps do to a human being isn't just physical. It goes deeper than hunger and pain. It changes the way a person thinks, feels, and sees the world. The camp had not just imprisoned Shin's body, it had reshaped his mind. An estimated 40% of prisoners in North Korea's political camps die from malnutrition, not from violence, not from executions, just from not having enough food day after day, while being forced to work as hard as a person possibly can. Former prisoners have described arriving at the camps and being shocked at what they saw: other prisoners who looked like skeletons, dressed in torn and patched rags, covered in dirt, with hunched backs from years of bending over in agricultural fields. Detainees were regularly told that they were traitors who deserved to be executed, but that the government had generously decided to let them live so they could spend the rest of their lives working to repay the nation for their crimes. This was the mental framework. You were not a prisoner. You were a kept alive traitor. You should be grateful. You should work harder. You should be thankful that you still had a heartbeat. They found ways to hold on to small pieces of themselves. They hid tiny scraps of food. They whispered to each other at night. They found moments, just moments, to remember who they were before the gates closed behind them. One of the most surprising things that survivors described is this: even in the darkest place, humans look for something to hold on to. A reason, a memory, a tiny spark of something. One day, a new prisoner arrived at the camp. An older man who had actually lived outside, who had seen the world beyond the fence. And this man told Shin something. He told him about food. He described the kinds of food people ate on the outside: chicken, pork, beef, things that were luxury items in the camp, eaten only by guards. That was it. That was the moment something shifted inside Shin. Not a dream of freedom, not a vision of a better life, just the thought of eating whatever he wanted. After that, I thought about it and made up my mind that I wanted to escape, eat as much chicken as I could, and get shot the next day, Shin later said. He wasn't even sure he wanted to live once he got out. He just wanted, for once in his life, to not be hungry. Drop a comment below what part of this story surprises you the most. We read every single one. What happened next, how a man born into a prison, who had never known anything else, actually got out, is one of the most remarkable things you will ever hear. Because once Shin reached the outside world, he didn't just have to survive North Korea. He had to survive the truth about himself. Secrets he kept for years. Things he changed. Things he hid. Not just from the world, but from himself. 2 men. A mountain. A fence laced with electricity strong enough to kill. And one of them driven not by hope, not by courage, but by the simple, desperate desire to eat a proper meal. In 2005, Shin and a fellow prisoner named Park were sent to work on a remote part of the camp near the outer fence. Driven by hunger, the two decided to escape over the electrified fence that enclosed the camp. There was no big plan, no map, no helpers on the outside, just 2 hungry men and a gap in the wire. Park went first. He grabbed the fence and his body hit the voltage. He fell, and in that terrible moment, something happened that Shin would carry with him for the rest of his life. Shin crawled over the dead body of his friend, who had been electrocuted on the fence. His friend's body acted as a kind of insulator from the full voltage, but just as Shin wiggled through, his lower legs hit the wires and burned him from knee to ankle. The scars were severe. After 23 years inside those walls, Shin Dong-hyuk walked out into a world he had never known. The outside world didn't feel like freedom. It felt like another kind of prison. In Shanghai, he snuck into the South Korean consulate and was granted asylum. In 2006, he arrived in South Korea with not a friend in the world. He was so overwhelmed by culture shock and post-traumatic stress that he had to be hospitalized. Think about it. He had never used a phone. He had never ridden in a car without fear. He had never gone to sleep without wondering if the next morning would bring punishment. And now, there were lights everywhere, voices everywhere, choices everywhere, and all of it felt unbearable. When asked if he knew the world was round, Shin replied, "I had no idea if it was round or square. Camp 14 was all I knew for the first 23 years of my life." He didn't know geography. He didn't know music. He didn't know what it meant to sit somewhere and just feel safe. The camp had broken things inside him that couldn't be fixed by simply opening a gate. Years after Shin became world famous, after his story was published as a book that sold millions of copies, after he testified before the United Nations, after he appeared on television programs watched by tens of millions of people, he called a journalist and said 4 unexpected words. In January 2015, Shin revealed that parts of his story were not true. He admitted he had spent most of his life, not in Camp 14, a total control zone, but in a different camp, Camp 18. He had changed details about when and how he was tortured, and the circumstances of his escape. The world didn't know what to do with this. Some people said it meant his whole story was fake. Others said he should be dismissed entirely. Journalist Blaine Harden, who wrote Shin's biography, described him as a flawed eyewitness to the savagery of the world's last totalitarian state. He added, raised in a dysfunctional family in a secret prison, badly educated and tortured, he is still a flawed witness. In other words, this was a man who had been tortured, who had never received a real education, who had been raised in a system that twisted his mind from birth. And years later, while dealing with deep trauma, he had tried to shape his own story in a way that made sense to him. Shortly after escaping, Shin formulated what he called a sanitized version of his life, which he repeated for almost 10 years. He simplified things. He changed some details. Trauma does that to people. It rearranges memories, fills in gaps, and buries the most painful parts. The scars on his body were real. The burns on his legs were real. The missing part of his finger cut off by a guard as punishment for dropping a sewing machine was real. The electrified fence, the labor, the hunger, the execution of his mother and brother, all of that was confirmed. What changed were some of the details. The exact camp, the exact timing, the exact order of events. But North Korea's camps, those were as real as ever. If this story is making you think, drop a comment. What part of this hit you the hardest? We read every single comment, because while the world was debating Shin's story, something else was quietly happening. Something that required no debate at all. The camps were still there, not as history, not as something from a long time ago. Right now, as of 2025, North Korea is operating 4 known political prison camps: Camp 14, Camp 16, Camp 18, and Camp 25, with an estimated 53,000 to 65,000 people imprisoned inside them. You can see them from space. The fences, the watchtowers, the rows of buildings in the mountains. In April 2025, satellite imagery revealed that a brand new prison was being built in Hwangju County. In July 2025, another facility showed signs of major construction and expansion. They are not shrinking, they are growing. In September 2025, the United Nations released a major report. Human Rights Chief Volker T. Rike stated, "What we have witnessed is a lost decade." The report confirmed that political prison camps continue to operate, and that the fate of hundreds of thousands of disappeared people remains unknown. The unconfirmed, they have credible evidence that people have been executed not just for criticizing the government, but for things like distributing foreign movies or music. New laws have led to increased surveillance and more people being sent to forced labor camps. This is not ancient history. A child born in one of those camps today will grow up the same way Shin did, not knowing what the world looks like from the outside, not knowing what it feels like to choose what to eat, not knowing that somewhere beyond the fence, there are people who have never heard of them. Thousands of people, including entire families, are currently detained in these camps. Crimes include attempting to flee the country, practicing a religion, or being accused of what the government calls reactionary ideology. Women prisoners are particularly vulnerable to sexual violence. Medical treatment is denied. Torture is routine. A defector named Yumi Kim, who escaped North Korea by boat in 2023, described a country that has only grown more controlled under Kim Jong-un, with stronger surveillance, a wider network of informants, and tighter control over everyday life. She said the government uses wiretaps, warrantless searches, beatings, and executions to crack down on anyone caught with outside information. And yet, she also noticed something the government might not be able to stop. Younger generations are quietly pushing back. They smuggle in flash drives from across the Chinese border. They secretly watch South Korean shows and movies on hidden devices. They make illegal phone calls across the border. In a country built entirely on silence, some people are finding ways to whisper. A man born in a prison, who grew up thinking prisoners were just what some people were born to be, who reported his own family because that was what the system had made him, who crawled over his dying friend to reach a world he didn't understand, who told a story that wasn't perfectly accurate, because trauma is not a perfectly accurate thing, and who, despite all of that, became one of the loudest voices the world has ever heard about what is happening inside those mountains. When Shin was asked how he had changed since escaping, he said, "When I see videos of the Holocaust, it moves me to tears. I think I am still evolving from an animal to a human." He wasn't calling himself an animal as an insult. He was describing what the camp had built him to be. A person with no attachment, no love, no sense of the value of another life. And slowly, painfully, imperfectly, he was learning how to become something else. That journey is not over for him. And it is not over for the tens of thousands of people still behind those fences today. People whose names we don't know, whose faces we've never seen, who have never had the chance to tell their story to anyone. The camps are real. The people inside them are real. And the world most of the time looks away. Maybe that's the most unsettling mystery of all. Not that these places exist, but that we already know they do.